The Hong Kong government has created a special biologically enhanced combat team called Squad 701. Members of this squad have undergone brain surgery to remove their nerves, granting them superhuman strength and making them insusceptible to fear and pain. However, some members have become mentally unstable after the procedure, and the project is considered a failure when one of them kills 10 officers in a psychotic rage. So, the government then orders the extermination of the experimental squad. After getting wind of the government's evil intention, Black Mask, a super soldier of the same squad, fights head-on with the army of armed soldiers. After a long battle resulting in numerous casualties, Black Mask successfully escapes. Now, many years after that battle, the Black Mask has blended perfectly into society under his new identity as Sui Chick, a mild-mannered librarian. He enjoys his peaceful life, reading books in the library where his co-workers have no knowledge of his past. We are then introduced to Tracy, who is also working in the same library. She is agonizing over her heartbreak, while her co-worker suggests that she should go out with Sui. He is not only good-looking, but also has a nice personality. Sui is not her ideal type, but the nice things that her co-workers have said about him get her to consider their advice. Just as Tracy was considering asking Sui out, Inspector Shek Wai-ho arrives to take him to a chess match. Sui feels comfortable around Shek, so he considers Shek to be his only friend. While playing chess, he feels that Shek is not his usual self, so he asks if it is related to the ongoing case. Recently, there has been a killing spree where 30 drug dealers have been killed by an unknown group. Shek tells him that all the drug dealers should get killed, but Sui disagrees and comments that criminals should be given chance to reflect on their wrongdoings. After losing the game, Shek lands a punch right in Sui's face for no reason. However, Sui doesn't react negatively to his action. This makes Shek frustrated that this gentle Sui won't be able to protect himself in this messy world. Then, Shek goes to relieve himself in the washroom, and Sui also follows him. Just then, a man approaches Sui, asking him to lend him some money, and without hesitation, Sui gives him $20. Seeing how easy it is to take money from Sui, the man demands more. Without much thought, Sui gives him all the money he has with him, but the man is not satisfied. Suddenly, another man joins the robber, and with the knife pointing at Sui's throat, they start harassing him. Meanwhile, Shek has been listening to their conversation from the washroom cubicle, and when he comes out, he easily deals with the robbers. All of a sudden, Shek receives an urgent message on his pager, prompting him to leave quickly. Sui, who has picked up Shek's watch from the basin, is about to follow his friend out. However, the robbers make one last attempt to stop him. Little did they know that they will be getting the final, yet powerful blow from the gentle-looking Sui. As Sui steps out, he overhears Shek's conversation on the phone. Over 100 men involved in drug dealing have been brutally massacred, with only one survivor who had his chest open and then stitched up again. The survivor is now being taken to the hospital. Just a few hours ago, Tai, a leader of a local drug dealing gang, and his men arrive at the dock. People from the same line of work suspect King Cow, another drug dealer leader, to be behind the killings. But as they soon enter the chamber, they realize that they have walked into the trap. They see dead bodies piled up on a table. But before the men could retreat, spraying installations activates, spraying toxic chemicals all over the area. And after a short struggle, they die on the spot. Tai is the sole survivor, who is later apprehended by a mysterious man who injects him with an unknown substance. Later, the hospital X-ray reveals electronic equipment being planted into Tai's heart. The timer, visible in the X-ray, suggests that it might be a bomb, prompting the bomb disposal team to be summoned. Meanwhile, Sui also arrives at the hospital, but the security does not allow him to meet Shek. Since the operation might result in a fatal explosion, only 3 people, Shek, a doctor, and a bomb defusal officer, remain behind for the operation. Bomb wire, intertwined with the blood vessels, makes it difficult to operate, and just when they cut a blue wire, an officer barges in and tells Shek that the commissioner is on the phone. But when he receives the phone, the person on the other end is Sui Chick. Sui tells him not to cut the blue wire. However, Shek tells him that they have already cut it. Hearing this, Sui urges Shek to run away since the bomb will go off any minute. So Shek tries his best to warn others to evacuate the hospital, but the bomb explodes. The next day, Shek goes to visit Sui at the library. He questions Sui about how he contacted him and had knowledge about disposing of the bomb. Sui tells him that just by pretending to be the police commissioner, he could get in contact with him in the nick of time. And about disposing of the bomb, it can be found in the books. Now that Tsui realizes that the ordinary police force is not capable of fighting the one who is behind this killing spree, Tsui brings back his black mask. And while holding the mask in his hand, his memories of being the subject of the experiment come afresh. Years later, when Tsui found out that the government is planning to kill him and everyone from the Squad 701, he asks his comrade Yuklan to alert everyone and get out of the place as soon as possible. That was the last time he saw her. Now, he has no choice but to bring back his dark past and come out as Black Mask. On the other side, Inspector Shek, along with some other police officers, has come to King Kao's lair. When King Kao asks for police protection, Shek loses control and asks from whom he wants to be protected. King has no idea from whom, but looking at the situation, he knows that the next target would be him. Meanwhile, the police find a woman tied up and suspended in the air. When asked about it, King Kao tells the officers that the woman herself wanted to be hanged, and the woman agrees. All at once, the situation becomes chaotic when an explosion takes place. With police and the gang members in one place, they have all been ambushed. Shortly after, a tracked loader forcefully makes its way into that small space, but there is no driver to control it, so Shek takes the seat of the driver. However, seconds later, a man hiding in the bucket shows himself and starts haphazardly firing. Just then, Shek sneaks an attack and handcuffs one of his hands onto the vehicle, but to his surprise, the man does not hesitate to cut off his hand and continues fighting. And to make matters more interesting, other accomplices arrive in their skating shoes. Meanwhile, Tsui, disguised as Black Mask, comes to provide aid to the police. He witnesses Black Mask and the attacker's unnatural superhuman abilities, while Black Mask helps to fight off these superhuman opponents. At the same time, even in such a situation, King Kao dares to flirt with the one who was suspended in the air previously, but the same woman becomes the cause of his destruction. She would have killed him if Black Mask had not come. Now, Black Mask immediately recognizes her as his former teammate, Yuklan. The attackers, when failed the mission, called for a retreat, but Yuklan gets caught nevertheless, and at last, when Shek is almost hit with the demolishing metal ball, Black Mask saves him from getting hit by it. He then escapes, leaving behind his cap, but nobody except Shek has seen the Black Mask in action. So when he puts on the left-behind cap, the others think that he is the Black Masked hero, and with this, the news quickly spread in the station as well. The next morning, Tsui visits Shek to hand over his watch and ask for the favor of meeting a student, Yuklan. He meets them alone, and Tsui asks her who her boss is, but before she could answer him, a few men come to get her. Even when they beat him to a pulp, he does not raise his hands. Just then, Shek comes to his rescue and chases them all, but he is still unaware of his real identity. Meanwhile, Yuklan returns back to the underground hideout where the boss, ex-commander of Squad 701, Hung, is looking after things. Hung has formed an organization with the surviving members of Squad 701 and is currently involved in shady businesses that are taking market throughout the world. He is stressed out by the interference of this Black Mask in his business. Yuklan informs them that the Black Mask is none other than their former coach and conveys Tsui's message of wanting to meet the boss. Now, Commander Hung plans to bring Tsui on his side. Hung is certain that Tsui will accept his offer, as he is also the product of failed experiments like themselves. With this, Tsui decides to resign from his work so as not to put his co-workers' lives in danger. But just then, he gets a call from distressed Tracy asking him to save her. Within no time, he reaches the library, but it turns out that they have planned for his surprise birthday party. Tsui becomes angry with them and hands over the resignation letter and leaves. But Tracy couldn't leave him alone and started following him. And just when he is about to leave, he sees two cars approaching them. Realizing that the situation might get tense, Tsui hurries Tracy to enter the car, and once they enter, there, Commander Hung appears virtually on the windshield. Tsui presses some pressure points on Tracy's neck and causes her to pass out. He then refuses the commander's offer and straight up calls him a nut. The angry Hung orders his men to attack them, but before they could cause them any harm, Tsui runs away, carrying Tracy, while killing everyone who comes behind them. At last, he takes Tracy to his hideout. When she wakes up, Tracy thinks that he has kidnapped her, so she tries to run away. This compelled Tsui to tie a piece of cloth to her mouth and keep her chained up. After spending some time with the Black Mask, she gets worried about leaving behind Tsui. Later on, Tsui calls Tracy and talks with her in a normal voice and tells her to stay put and not cause any trouble. Meanwhile, not knowing that the police server has been hacked by Hung's people, the Hong Kong police discuss the involvement of foreign drug dealers in the killing spree. Meanwhile, Hung has started stealing and downloading information from the police system to sell the list of drug dealers to the US government. He puts Yuklan in charge to get back at Tsui by using Shek as bait. Later on, the police system goes down, and there displays a message warning them to eliminate King Cow by midnight, or there might be a number of casualties. That afternoon, Tsui comes to find Shek at the station. He forewarns Shek about the King Cow plan being a trap and him being used as bait. This time, Tsui blocks Shek's punch and tells him that he no longer wishes to keep things hidden from him. That night, an ambulance carrying an injured patient comes rushing to the hospital. The police cannot make them return, seeing a bloodied person on the stretcher. But just then, the patient suddenly attacks the doctors and nurses in the operation theater. Realizing the commotion, the standby officer barges in and fires quite a few rounds of bullets at him. Meanwhile, Yuklan enters King Cow's room through the ventilation vent and starts firing at the bed and a person sitting on the chair. However, it turns out that the figures were mere dummies, while Shek injects anesthesia into Yuklan from under the bed and puts a handcuff on her leg. And at last, she gets surrounded by the police and the anesthesia starts showing its effect. As if Yuklan was not enough, the police face another batch of attacking intruders, which is clearly out of their league, and there is no way they could win against them. Fortunately, Black Mask shows up and saves Shek, and soon after, he takes Yuklan and flees from there. On the other hand, Black Mask saves Yuklan, but she repays it by stabbing him in the shoulder. She asks him to join hands with them, but the heavily injured Black Mask crawls back to his hideout. He then sets Tracy free, but she could not leave him alone in such a state. She drags him out in order to help him, but what awaits them outside is Yuklan, who almost kills Tracy. But while saving Tracy, the former teammate get into a brutal fight. Yuklan remembers the time in the past when Tsui saved her, so she couldn't bring herself to kill him. Hung, having observed this, knows that Yuklan is of no use to him, so he ends up killing her. On the other hand, after escaping from there, Tracy steals some blood from the hospital in order to save Black Mask, who has been losing a lot of blood. The next day, Tsui goes to visit Shek and tells him that the only way to stop them is to ruin their plan. He explains that they are accessing the police system to steal information. He then gives Shek a CD, which can make a virus enter their system if they try to access the police system. Shek is still angry with Tsui because he is the reason Yuklan escaped, so he wants to have a fair fight with Tsui, but as expected, he can't defeat him. Back in the station, Shek threatens his fellow officer with a gun to put the disc on the computer, and as soon as the disc is inserted, the virus infects the system on the other side. Shek's gun has been empty all along. However, the chief takes him off the case from that moment onwards. Once Shek cools down, he figures out that there must be a mole within the police department for them to infiltrate the system so easily, and their lair must be beneath the police station. Just then, a relatively new officer approaches to back him up. So they take out the arms, forging the commander's signature, and set to catch Hung on his own. While descending the underground stairs, his subordinate cuts his hand deeply, but he shows no reaction to the wound at all. This raises suspicion about Shek, so he casually talks about things the real subordinate ought to be familiar with. However, the subordinate fails his test and ends up being shot by Shek before he could attack him. Nevertheless, Shek got caught. On the other hand, Tsui has planted a bug on Shek's watch previously, so he knows when Shek ran into the problem. But before he goes for Shek's rescue, Tracy asks him to show his face to her, and when he does, she becomes stunned to find the familiar face underneath the mask. The download is at its final stage when Black Mask enters the underground hideout of Commander Hung. He shows Black Mask that Shek is tied up with a time bomb that will be exploding in 2 minutes. Before he could help Shek, Tsui is occupied with fighting Hung's men, and at the same time, avoiding the laser beams, but he takes advantage of the laser and kills his opponent using it. With only 30 seconds left before the bomb detonates, Tsui quickly dismantles Shek's pager and manages to disarm the timer at just 4 seconds. And now, Tsui and Shek take different paths to catch Hung. However, Hung knocks out Shek and is not an easy opponent for Tsui as well. He makes maximum use of his surroundings to fight Tsui. At this point, Hung lures him into a chamber and fills it with poisonous gas. Meanwhile, the download is almost complete, but Tsui gets his hand first on the disk and destroys the computer. When Hung comes at him for that disk, Tsui simultaneously throws a smaller, razor-sharp disk, cutting his throat. The sparks fall on the stopped bomb, which activates it once again. But before it could explode, they both run to a safe distance, and at last, Hung's burning skull can be seen rolling around. In the end, Shek and Tracy help Tsui to flee from the country by boat. But before that, Tracy wants to take a picture with them. The picture is clicked, but when the Polaroid picture comes out of the camera, it is the picture of Shek and Tracy on either side, and black mask in the middle.